There are stories that are not meant to be told in daylight, not because they are frightening, but because in daylight they sound like something made up. It is different in winter, when darkness comes early and a quiet fire crackles somewhere nearby. That is when words settle differently. It feels less like listening and more like remembering. In places like ours, winter was never just a season, it was a test. Snow could erase a path overnight, and the wind could wipe away footprints as if no one had ever passed through. Going out at night without a clear reason was not considered brave, it was considered careless. There was an old road near the edge of the village, not a road for markets, and not a road people took to gather, just a narrow path that began near the last house, crossed the open field, and disappeared into the forest. Old people spoke of it simply, "That road remembers." When I was younger, I thought they said it to scare us, to keep us from wandering too far. But with time, I learned something important. Not everything old people say is a story, and not every warning comes from fear. There are places where a person hears their own thoughts more clearly, and it is often there that choices are made no one else ever sees. This is not a story about ghosts, and not a story about magic. It is a story about a quiet moment in winter, and a choice made far from witnesses. A choice no one saw, but one that did not disappear. Every village has someone people do not argue about. Not because that person is the loudest or the most important, but because doubt never seems to follow their name. In our village, that person was Peter. People did not use his full name, not out of disrespect. It simply never felt necessary. If someone needed help, they said, "Ask Peter." If something had to be done quietly and right, they went to him. He lived at the very edge of the village, where the houses thinned out and the open field began almost at the doorstep. His house was old and low, with windows set close to the ground. In winter, snow often reached the roofline, as if the house itself were trying to hide from the wind. Peter was not a man of many words. When he spoke, it was briefly. When he listened, he did not interrupt. People trusted him for that alone. He lived by himself. His wife had passed away many years earlier, back when winters were said to be gentler. There were no children. No one ever heard him complain. At night, when lights in the village went out one by one, Peter's window often stayed lit a little longer. Not bright, just enough to be noticed. People assumed he was sitting by the stove, warming himself, thinking his own thoughts. No one asked what those thoughts were. There was one more thing people knew about him. Petro knew the old road, the one older folks spoke of in lowered voices, the path most avoided, especially in winter. Peter walked it more often than anyone else, not because he feared nothing, but because he seemed to understand where it led.
The old road did not begin where people expected it to. There was no sign, no marker, no clear turn. You had to know where to leave the familiar path. From Peter's house, the trail first crossed the open field. In winter, snow flattened everything there, as if boundaries, tracks, and directions had never existed. Only after passing a few bare trees did the ground seem to change. The snow lay differently beyond that point, heavier, pressed down. In some places, dark patches of earth showed through, as if someone had walked there, even when most people stayed indoors by the fire. Older villagers used to say, "That road remembers feet." Everyone understood it differently. Some claimed people lost their way there. Others said the road had a habit of growing longer at night. A few simply went quiet whenever it was mentioned, and that silence said more than words. Peter walked that road more than once, more than twice,
but he never spoke about what he saw or heard. When asked, he would only shrug and say, "It's just a road." Yet those who watched closely noticed something. Each time he returned, he paused at his doorstep before going inside, as if he needed a moment to leave something behind. In winter, the road changed again. Snow erased familiar shapes. Trees felt closer. Silence grew deeper. Time behaved strangely there. A few steps could feel like an hour. A long walk could pass before night seemed to truly begin. That was why people avoided it, not because it frightened them, but because it made them unsure. The road did not threaten, it waited, and every step taken on it was more than movement forward. It was a small decision. Peter understood that, perhaps better than most, and that winter, when nights grew longer than days and the cold refused to loosen its grip, the old road led him to a place where walking forward was no longer enough. A choice was waiting. That night, the cold had a weight to it. Not the kind that stings the skin, but the kind that settles into the ground and makes everything feel still. Even the snow felt hard, not crunchy underfoot, solid, as if the earth beneath it had stopped breathing. The sky was clear, no clouds, yet it offered no comfort. The moon hung high and pale, as though it too felt the cold and did not wish to look down for long. Peter stepped outside before darkness fully claimed the land. Not in a rush, he had no clear reason, only a sense that something needed checking. He closed the door behind him, tested the latch, then stood still for a moment on the threshold. It was an old habit. Before walking into the night, he always paused, as if leaving warmth required permission. He carried a lantern, not to push the darkness away, but to remind himself where he stood. In a night like this, light does not defeat the dark. It only shows you the few steps closest to your feet. His boots pressed into the snow without sound. The cold swallowed every noise. Not even the familiar creak of frozen ground answered him. Time slowed. Or perhaps it simply stopped leaving marks. Peter walked along the familiar path, yet it felt longer than usual, not because it had changed, but because the night refused to hurry. He stopped once, then again, not from tiredness, from listening. In moments like these, the world seems to hold its breath. No wind, no movement, even thoughts arrive more slowly. Peter turned his gaze toward the open field. By day it stretched far and wide. By night it showed nothing at all. The snow reflected the moon evenly, without shadows, like an untouched surface waiting for something to be written on it. He thought about nights like this, how they deceive. They feel calm, but it is not calmness, it is a pause, and pauses are dangerous. Because when nothing changes for a long while, a person begins to believe nothing will. Peter stood there, unable to tell whether minutes or half an hour had passed, and it was precisely then, when the stillness felt complete, when the night seemed to want nothing from him, that he heard the sound. Not loud, not sharp, not even immediately clear. It felt less like something entering the silence, and more like something rising from within it. Peter stopped, this time completely. At first, Peter could not tell what the sound was. On winter nights, sound behaves strangely. It bends, travels farther than it should, or disappears altogether, leaving behind only the sense that something might have been there. Peter slowed his steps until he stopped completely. When his boots fell silent, the world around him seemed to follow, as if the night itself were waiting to see what he would do next. He listened carefully, aware of his own breath turning into pale clouds before his face. Without thinking, he slowed it, instinctively, as though breathing too loudly might disturb whatever lingered in the darkness. The sound came again. This time it no longer resembled the wind. There was something uneven in it, broken, as if someone were trying to speak but lacked the strength to shape words. For a moment, Peter considered the simplest explanation, that he had imagined it, that the silence had grown so deep his mind was filling the emptiness on its own. That happens on nights like this. He stepped off the road carefully, letting his weight settle into the snow one step at a time. Then he stopped again and waited. Nothing followed. In moments like these, the sensible choice is to keep walking. Later, by the warmth of the fire, it is easy to convince yourself that stopping was unnecessary, that nothing truly called out to you at all. Peter knew this well. He stood still and counted his breath slowly, allowing the cold to sharpen his thoughts rather than cloud them. Then the sound returned a third time. It was quieter now, no longer a call, but something that could not remain silent any longer, even if it wished to. Something tightened inside him. Not fear, recognition. Many winters ago, Peter himself had walked through the night in much the same way, cold, exhausted, calling out not loudly, but carefully, already sensing that his voice might not last. He remembered standing still, listening for footsteps, hoping someone would hear him, and he remembered the moment he understood that no one would. Slowly, Peter pulled off one glove and pressed his bare hand to his face. The cold bit sharply into his skin, clear enough to steady his thoughts. "I can keep walking," he told himself. "No one would blame me. The road asks nothing of those who pass it, the night even less." Peter turned toward the direction of the sound, the lantern still lowered, its light not yet invited into the dark. He stood there for several long seconds, waiting for the decision to make itself. It did not. Decisions never do. At last, Peter raised the lantern and took a single step, not forward, not back, but away from the road, toward where the darkness lay thickest. And in that moment he understood clearly. Whatever followed, he would not return to how things had been only minutes before. Peter raised the lantern slowly, not all at once, as if he feared that a sudden movement might frighten away not the person in the dark, but the resolve that had finally taken shape inside him. The light spread forward in a narrow, careful arc, sliding across the snow, catching on uneven drifts, tracing the dark trunks of trees until it reached the edge of the road and stopped. There, slightly below the path, someone was sitting, not lying down, not moving, not calling out anymore, just sitting with shoulders slumped and head lowered, as though standing had become an effort too great to attempt again. Peter noticed the clothing immediately, or rather how little of it there was. What covered the man's shoulders looked thin and worn, more a memory of warmth than any real protection, the kind of coat one might wear in late autumn, not on a winter night that pressed so heavily against the land. The man did not look up at once. He shifted slightly, as though testing whether the light was real, and only then raised his head, blinking against the glow. His eyes were dull, not with fear, but with cold and exhaustion, the kind that settles in when the body has already begun to give up arguments with the night. The man began, but the word broke apart before it could become a sentence. Peter lowered the lantern and placed it gently on the snow between them, so the light would not strike the man's face directly. For a moment they remained that way, two figures facing each other across a small pool of light, while the darkness leaned in from all sides. "How long have you been here?" Peter asked. The man shrugged, the motion stiff and awkward, as though his shoulders had forgotten how to answer simple questions. "I lost the way," he said after a pause. "I thought I'd reach the houses." His voice was quiet and steady, not pleading and not defensive, the voice of someone who no longer had the strength to hide anything at all. Peter looked around slowly, taking in the road, the forest, and the open night beyond them. He knew this place well, knew how quickly cold drains strength from the body, and how even a capable man could fail to walk a few hundred steps once exhaustion took hold. And he knew something else. If he pointed out the direction and did nothing more, there would be no one standing here by morning. The thought came calmly, without fear or urgency, and that was what made it dangerous. Peter crouched until he was level with the man and looked at his hands. The fingers were pale, too pale, already losing their willingness to obey. "Where is your coat?" Peter asked. "Took it off," the man said after another pause. "On the road. Thought I'd walk easier without it." Peter said nothing. He had heard such advice before, spoken by people who meant well and survived long enough to repeat it. He also knew how it usually ended. He straightened slowly, and for the first time since raising the lantern, thought not about the stranger, but about himself. The distance back to his house was not great, but without a coat, it was enough to turn a familiar walk into something else entirely. He looked at his own hands, then back at the man, and finally toward the road stretching ahead, patient and unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world. I could tell him the way, Peter thought. That would be reasonable. I could give him my coat and walk back without it. That would be dangerous. Both choices made sense, only one carried weight. Peter remembered another winter, another night, another road, and the quiet hope that someone would do more than point the way. Slowly he unfastened his belt, not because it was difficult, but because the movement gave him one last chance to stop. Then he removed his coat. The cold seized his shirt at once, sharp and immediate, but Peter barely noticed. He draped the coat over the man's shoulders, pulled it close, and lifted the collar. "Put it on, don't stay here." The man looked at him as though the night itself had spoken. "I'll return it," he whispered. Peter shook his head. "Go," he said. "When you see light, there will be people." He lifted the lantern and showed the way forward, then turned away without looking back, knowing that if he did, he might stop. And stopping was no longer an option. Peter felt the cold almost at once. Not the sharp kind that strikes the skin and demands attention, but the deeper cold that settles quietly beneath clothing and stays there, patient and unyielding. The shirt against his back grew damp, his breathing shortened, and he adjusted his pace, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Every unnecessary movement now carried a price. The road he had walked countless times no longer felt familiar. It had not changed, yet something about it had shifted, as though each step now required consent rather than habit. Peter stopped. He did not do so suddenly. He simply recognized the moment when standing still mattered more than moving forward. He listened to his breathing, slow and controlled, and felt his heart beating beneath the cold. This was not the time to hurry. Cold punishes haste. Those who rush grow tired sooner, and tiredness invites mistakes. When he moved again, it was carefully, letting his weight settle fully with each step. The snow beneath his boots was hard in places and fragile in others. At times it held, at times it broke, sending his foot through the crust and allowing the cold to seize his leg sharply, as if to remind him how exposed he had become. Peter paid attention to these signs. He listened not only to the night around him, but to himself, to the rhythm of his breathing, the strength in his legs, the quiet space where doubt often lived. The doubt did not come. He knew what he had done, and that knowledge steadied him. Ahead, a darker shape slowly emerged from the night, not light, but something less empty than the darkness around it. A house. Peter stopped once more and lowered himself into a crouch, resting his hands on his knees and allowing his body a moment to recover. His fingers moved poorly, stiff and slow, but they moved. That was enough. For a brief moment, another thought surfaced. What if the man did not make it? What if the choice had changed nothing at all? Peter did not force the thought away. He simply refused to follow it. Because once you begin counting all the possible outcomes, all the paths that might have led elsewhere, the road ends sooner than your steps do. He stood again and continued, slowly and evenly, allowing the distance to close without challenging it. With each step, something inside him grew quieter. Not empty, quieter. As though he had set down more than a coat on that road, as though excuses, explanations, and unnecessary words had been left behind in the snow as well. When Peter reached his door, his hands struggled with the latch. The metal was cold and slick, unwilling to cooperate. He leaned his shoulder into the door, pulled, and felt it give way. Inside, the darkness was different, contained, waiting. He did not sit down at once. First, he stirred the embers in the stove, added a piece of wood, and watched as the fire slowly gathered strength, answering his effort without haste. Only then did he sit. His hands trembled, not violently, but with the delayed reaction of a body that had not yet accepted that the night was over. Peter watched the flames and did not think about what might follow. He did not expect gratitude. He did not search for reassurance. He knew only this: if he were to face the same night again, the same road, and the same choice, he would not walk it differently. And that certainty warmed him more deeply than the coat ever could. After that night, nothing seemed to change. Winter remained firm in its place. The cold did not loosen its grip. Snow continued to fall and settle, smoothing the land as if no choice had been made at all. Peter woke later than usual the next morning, not from pain, but from a deep, lingering weariness that comes only after tension finally releases its hold. He moved carefully through the house, started the stove, ate a small piece of bread without much appetite. Everything around him felt familiar, and that, more than anything else, unsettled him. The day passed quietly, then another followed much the same way. No one spoke of a man found on the road, no questions were asked, no rumors reached Peter's door. At times, he caught himself wondering whether the night had truly happened. Winter has a way of softening memories, especially those that leave no witnesses behind. Days blur together, and what once felt sharp begins to fade at the edges. Peter avoided the old road unless he had reason to walk it, not because he feared it, but because he understood that some places carry more weight when they are left undisturbed. Weeks went by. Days shortened further, nights deepened, growing heavier and quieter. Then, one evening, as Peter was placing another piece of wood into the stove, there came a knock at the door. It was not loud, not urgent. It was the kind of knock that asks to be noticed, not demands it. Peter did not hurry. He wiped his hands slowly, walked to the door, and opened it. A man stood at the threshold. He wore a warm coat. His posture was steady. At first glance, his face did not look familiar. Only after a moment did recognition settle in, quiet but certain. "Good evening," the man said. His voice was even, unstrained, carrying none of the weakness Peter remembered from the night on the road. Peter said nothing. "I made it, that night." The words were simple and unadorned. He spoke briefly of the houses he reached, of doors that opened, of warmth returning to his limbs slowly and without drama. "I didn't know how to find you," he said at last, "but I knew I had to try." He began to remove the coat from his shoulders. Peter raised a hand gently. "Keep it," he said. "You still have roads ahead of you." The man nodded as though he had expected no other answer. "I walk these places now, especially in winter. Not everyone makes it." They stood there for a moment longer, neither feeling the need to add anything more. Then the man turned and left, his steps steady as he disappeared into the dark. Peter closed the door and returned to the stove. The fire burned evenly. The warmth spread through the room, slow and dependable. Only then did Peter feel it clearly. That night had not passed without leaving a trace. Some things do not come at once. Some things arrive only after time had had a chance to settle around them. After that evening, life did not change its direction. Winter ended the way winters always do. Snow settled, paths reopened, people returned to the rhythm they had left behind. Peter lived as he always had. He worked, he spoke little, he helped when asked. Nothing about him appeared different, and yet something had shifted. The old road was no longer just a path that led away from the village. It had become a place where memory lingered, not in footprints, but in the quiet understanding of what had once been done there. Peter did not avoid the road, nor did he seek it out. He simply knew it was there. Sometimes when winter returned earlier than expected and darkness settled quickly, Peter would step out onto his threshold and look in that direction. He did not wait for anyone. He did not listen for sounds. He simply stood, letting the cold rest on his face, allowing the stillness to speak in its own way. People in the village said he was fortunate, that storms seemed to pass him by, that he always reached home before the cold became dangerous. Peter never argued, but he knew it was not fortune, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes after a choice has been made, and no effort is spent explaining it to others or even to oneself. Old people say that roads remember, not footsteps, but decisions. And if you walk such a road in winter, when the world grows quieter and more severe, you may come to understand something simple. Not every choice is seen. Not every choice is spoken of. Not every choice leaves a mark others can point to. But every choice remains with the one who makes it, like warmth that stays in the body long after the coat is gone. If this story stayed with you, you are welcome to return. Here by the quiet fire, we take our time. Stories around the campfire.